Albert Camus did not think rebellion was a scream. He thought it was a line, a boundary, a quiet but unbreakable refusal. When a human being revolts, they are not exploding with rage. They are saying something far more restrained and far more powerful. This must not continue. Revolt, in Camus' philosophy, begins when a person recognizes their own dignity. It is the moment when someone who has been pushed too far realizes that something inside them cannot be crossed, not because they are special, but because they are human. Revolt is not born from hatred, it is born from self-respect. This is why Camus believed revolt was moral before it was political. Most people associate revolt with violence, chaos, or destruction. Camus believed that this confusion was one of the great tragedies of modern history. When people equate revolt with fury, they miss what gives revolt its ethical power, its limits. A person who revolts does not want to destroy the world. They want to protect something within it, the fragile idea that human beings should not be humiliated, crushed, or reduced to nothing. Anger erupts when expectations are violated. Revolt emerges when dignity is violated. This difference matters. Anger is personal. It flares when we are wounded. It wants release. It wants recognition. It wants the world to pay attention to our pain. Revolt is quieter and deeper. It is not primarily about how you feel. It is about what you will not accept. Camus believed that revolt is what turns suffering into resistance. Without revolt, suffering collapses into despair or resentment. With revolt, suffering becomes a refusal to be erased. When a worker refuses exploitation, they are not expressing rage. They are asserting that their life is not a tool. When a prisoner resists degradation, they are not seeking revenge. They are declaring that they are still a person. Revolt is the moment when a human being says, "I am not nothing." This is why Camus believed that revolt connects people rather than dividing them. When one person says no to humiliation, they speak not only for themselves, but for all who are treated the same way. Revolt is born in isolation, but it points towards solidarity. Anger isolates, revolt unites. Anger says, "Look what they did to me." Revolt says, "This should not happen to anyone." Camus saw this distinction everywhere. He saw people who were angry because they had been hurt, and he saw people who revolted because they had recognized injustice. The first demanded compensation. The second demanded limits, and limits are what keep us human. Revolt is not about destroying what exists. It is about refusing what degrades. In a world without divine justice, without destiny, and without ultimate meaning, revolt becomes the way human beings defend their own worth. Not through force, but through refusal. This is where Camus' philosophy begins. Anger feels powerful. It floods the body with energy. It sharpens attention. It creates a sense of purpose. When people are angry, they feel alive. They feel justified. They feel like something is happening. Camus understood this attraction deeply, which is why he was so wary of it. Anger gives the illusion of strength. Revolt demands real strength. Anger is reactive. It erupts when something wounds us. It wants to strike back. It wants to discharge the pain it carries. This can feel like courage, but it is often just impulse. It does not ask what should be done. It only asks what will relieve the feeling. Revolt, by contrast, is not about relief. It is about resolve. When someone revolts, they do not explode. They stand. They say no. They hold a line even when it is uncomfortable, even when it costs them, even when it does not bring immediate satisfaction. Camus believed that this is why anger so easily replaces revolt. Anger is easier. It gives you the feeling of acting without requiring you to think. It does not ask you to remain human. It only asks you to express yourself. This is why anger can so easily become cruel. When you are angry, you want someone to blame. You want someone to hurt. You want the world to acknowledge your pain. In that moment, the humanity of others fades. They become obstacles, enemies, or symbols. Revolt never forgets the human face. A person who revolts does not want to dominate, they want to resist. They do not want to destroy others, they want to stop something that should not exist. Camus believed that this is why revolt contains its own moral limit. It knows what it is for, the defense of dignity. Anger knows only what it is against. This is a crucial difference. Anger is loud, revolt is firm. Anger burns, revolt endures. In a world where injustice is constant, anger can be tempting, but Camus believed that only revolt can remain faithful to human life. Camus believed that anger becomes most dangerous when it stops being a feeling and starts being a worldview. When people take their rage and wrap it in a story about how the world works, anger becomes ideology. And ideology gives anger permission to do terrible things. An ideology tells you who is good and who is evil. It tells you who belongs and who must be removed. It tells you that history is on your side. Once anger is armed with this story, it no longer feels like anger. It feels like justice. Camus had watched this happen in his lifetime. Movements that began by protesting injustice ended by building prisons. Revolutions that promised freedom ended by demanding obedience. People who believed they were fighting evil became capable of committing it. This happens when revolt is replaced by righteous anger. Revolt remains tied to real human beings. It responds to concrete suffering. Ideology turns people into abstractions. It no longer sees faces, it sees categories. You are no longer a person, you are an enemy, you are a problem to be solved. Camus believed that this was the moment when moral collapse begins. When people stop seeing one another as individuals, cruelty becomes easy. Anger wants enemies, revolt wants limits. An ideology fueled by anger has no limits. It believes anything is allowed if it serves the cause. People become expendable, pain becomes justified, violence becomes holy. Camus rejected this completely. He believed that the moment a rebellion claims the right to kill in the name of justice, it has betrayed what it was meant to protect. Revolt must never forget the human face. Albert Camus believed that the true test of revolt is not whether it wins, but whether it remains human. When people fight injustice, they are always tempted to adopt the methods of their enemies. They justify cruelty by saying it is necessary. Camus believed this was the moment when revolt dies. Revolt is defined by its limits. A limit is not weakness, it is a moral boundary. It is the line that says, even here, even now, even when we are wronged, there are things we will not do. Camus believed that the most important of these limits is the refusal to dehumanize. You do not torture, you do not murder, you do not treat people as tools, even if your cause is just. This position made Camus deeply unpopular. He opposed fascism, he opposed colonialism, he opposed exploitation, but he also opposed revolutionary terror. He would not accept the idea that killing could be justified by ideology. For Camus, revolt was not about winning history, it was about preserving dignity. When you cross certain lines, you may achieve power, but you lose what you were trying to defend. Anger does not know these limits. It wants victory. Revolt knows that some victories are worse than defeat. To revolt is to resist injustice without becoming unjust. Camus believed that revolt is born not from hatred of others, but from recognition of ourselves in them. When someone is humiliated, exploited, or crushed, something in us recognizes that their fate could be ours. Revolt begins when we feel that connection. This is why revolt, at its deepest level, is an act of solidarity. Anger separates. It draws lines between us and them. It feeds on opposition. It needs enemies in order to feel justified. Revolt does the opposite. It sees the same vulnerability in everyone. It recognizes that what is being done to one person could be done to any. Camus believed that this recognition is what gives revolt its moral force. You do not revolt because you hate those who do wrong. You revolt because you care about those who are being hurt. This distinction changes everything. When hatred enters a struggle, the struggle loses its soul. It becomes about punishment rather than protection. It seeks to humiliate rather than to defend. Camus believed that a revolt driven by hatred is already corrupted. True revolt does not want revenge. It wants limits. It wants a world where certain things are simply not done to human beings. This is why Camus insisted that revolt must always remain connected to living people. It cannot become abstract. It cannot be about a future humanity at the expense of present ones. The moment a cause sacrifices real people for an imagined tomorrow, it has betrayed revolt. Revolt, for Camus, is always here and now. It responds to actual suffering. It defends actual lives. Anger dreams of enemies. Revolt sees neighbors. Camus believed that one of the most seductive and dangerous feelings a human being can experience is righteousness. Righteousness feels like moral certainty. It feels like being on the right side of history. It feels like having permission to do what others cannot. But righteousness is what allows people to commit atrocities with a clean conscience. When you are righteous, you no longer doubt yourself. You no longer ask whether you might be wrong. You no longer feel the weight of what you do to others. You feel justified. Camus saw this as the moral enemy of revolt. Revolt requires awareness. Righteousness demands obedience. Revolt says, this is wrong. Righteousness says, we are right. This shift is subtle but deadly. When people believe they embody justice, they stop seeing individual lives. They see only causes. They begin to treat people as instruments. Pain becomes acceptable. Death becomes strategic. Camus believed that revolt must remain humble. It must know that it is defending something fragile, not enforcing something absolute. You revolt because suffering exists, not because you own the truth. This humility is what keeps revolt from turning into tyranny. Camus did not believe that revolt was only for revolutionaries or heroes. He believed it was something ordinary people practice every day. Revolt is not always dramatic. It is often quiet. Every time you refuse to humiliate someone, you revolt. Every time you speak when silence would be easier, you revolt. Every time you choose not to participate in cruelty, you revolt. This is what Camus meant when he spoke of revolt as a way of life. You do not need to overthrow a government to live in revolt. You need to remain attentive to how people are treated around you and to how you treat them yourself. Anger wants release. Revolt wants fidelity. Fidelity to the idea that human life has a worth that cannot be negotiated away. This is not glamorous. It is demanding. It requires you to resist the small temptations to become cynical, cruel, or indifferent. Camus believed that this daily revolt was the only thing that made freedom possible in an absurd world. Camus believed that revolt must be practiced without hope of final victory. This sounds bleak, but it is what makes revolt honest. When you revolt expecting the world to become just, you will eventually become bitter. When you revolt knowing that injustice will continue, you remain lucid. Revolt is not a path to paradise. It is a way of refusing hell. Camus rejected the idea that history was moving toward redemption. He believed that injustice, violence, and suffering would always exist. Revolt does not end them. It resists them. This means revolt must be renewed again and again, every generation, every day. Anger wants an ending. Revolt accepts continuity. You revolt not because you will win, but because something is wrong now. This is what makes revolt durable. It does not collapse when it fails. It does not become desperate when progress is slow. It remains what it is, a refusal. Camus believed that this refusal was the highest form of dignity. Camus believed that one of the great temptations after long struggle is cynicism. When people fight injustice and see how little changes, they begin to doubt whether anything is worth caring about at all. Cynicism feels intelligent. It feels like realism. But Camus believed it was another form of surrender. Cynicism says nothing matters, so nothing is worth defending. Revolt says things matter even if they are not saved. Anger often collapses into cynicism when it exhausts itself. After shouting for long enough, people become tired. They begin to mock what they once cared about. They distance themselves emotionally so that they will not be disappointed again. Camus believed this was one of the saddest outcomes of anger. It ends not in justice, but in indifference. Revolt never becomes cynical, because revolt is not based on hope. It is based on recognition. You recognize suffering, you recognize injustice, you recognize that something should not be. This recognition does not disappear just because the world fails to change. It remains as long as human beings remain capable of being hurt. Camus believed that cynicism is what happens when people confuse revolt with results. They think that if the world does not improve, then caring was foolish. But revolt was never about guarantees. It was about remaining awake. To revolt is to stay connected to what matters, even when it hurts. Cynicism cuts that connection. That is why Camus believed revolt was not only a political stance, but an emotional one. It is the refusal to become numb. Albert Camus believed that revolt is not aimed at creating a perfect world. It is aimed at protecting the ordinary one. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of his philosophy. People often think revolt is about grand visions, dramatic transformations, or total change. Camus thought it was about something much smaller and much more fragile. It is about defending ordinary lives, the right to walk without fear, the right to speak without being crushed, the right to exist without being humiliated. Revolt does not begin with abstract ideals. It begins with concrete injuries, a worker being exploited, a prisoner being beaten, a voice being silenced. Camus believed that when you see these things and feel that they should not be, you are already in revolt. Anger wants to remake the world. Revolt wants to keep it livable. This is why Camus distrusted utopian thinking. Utopias always require sacrifice. They demand that present suffering be accepted in the name of future happiness. Camus refused this bargain. He believed that no future is worth the destruction of present lives. Revolt is loyal to what exists now. This does not mean that it accepts the world as it is. It means that it measures change by its impact on real people, rather than by its ideological purity. Camus believed that when politics loses sight of ordinary life, it becomes monstrous. It begins to speak in numbers, categories, and goals. Individual faces disappear. Revolt restores them. To revolt is to say, these lives matter, not in theory, in practice. Camus believed that revolt was not something you did once, it was something you were. A way of standing in the world, a way of responding to injustice without becoming part of it. To live in revolt is to live alert. You do not drift. You do not numb yourself. You do not accept cruelty as normal. This kind of life is demanding. It requires constant attention. You must notice when you are tempted to look away. You must feel when you are beginning to harden. You must resist the urge to become indifferent. Anger burns out. Revolt does not. Because revolt is not fueled by emotion. It is fueled by commitment, a commitment to the simple idea that human beings should not be treated as things. Camus believed that this commitment is what gives life its quiet nobility. Even in a world without meaning, even in a history full of failure, a person who lives in revolt preserves something essential. They preserve the human measure. They do not accept everything. They do not justify everything. They remain capable of saying no. That is revolt. Albert Camus did not believe that revolt would save the world. He believed it would save something smaller, but more important, the idea that human beings are not disposable. In a universe without God, without destiny, and without final justice, revolt becomes the way we protect what cannot be justified by anything higher than itself, human life. Anger wants to burn, revolt wants to stand. Anger looks for enemies, revolt looks for limits. Anger seeks release, revolt seeks fidelity. fidelity to the fragile truth that suffering matters, even if nothing else does. Camus believed that this fidelity is what keeps us from becoming what we fight. Without it, every struggle collapses into cruelty. With it, even failure retains dignity. To revolt is to refuse humiliation. To revolt is to refuse dehumanization. To revolt is to refuse to let the absurd make us cold. You do not revolt because you are angry. You revolt because you are human.